I'd like to thank everyone for sitting in. Hopefully this is an engaging and informative hour for all of you. I'm in North Carolina, so I'm in, hopefully I have maybe a little bit of a southern accent, but hopefully you can, carry along with me. Let's dive in. There's a lot of material here. The topic is scaling, agile, and testing, and Scrum is sort of the wrapper. So testing in larger scale enterprise-like environments. It doesn't have to be a fidelity-like or very large-scale enterprise. It can be just, multiple agile teams. So agile in the large, as agile scales, I think it puts particular pressure on testers and testing organizations, and that's sort of what I want to share today is some of the dimensions around that. So the outline for today is we're going to talk about agile scaling in Scrum, a little bit of an overview. We're going to dive into Scrum, and we're using Scrum kind of as the wrapper, but most of the agile methodologies have the notion of a product owner or customer, so I think some of that stuff still applies in all of the methodologies. Next, we're going to talk about the role of the product owner in scaling, because from a testing point of view, we have a partner, and that's the product owner, and we can't go it alone, I guess is the point there, and we have to, partner with the product ownership or the customer or product engineering or product marketing organization in any scaling of Scrum or Agile. Then we're going to talk about some specific testing, I think, extensions in Scrum and testing, where we talk about some iterative models where I've gotten some use in kind of but integrating traditional testing into Agile methods. They're useful for when you can't do all of the testing in the iteration. So we'll talk about some models that I've gotten some use in, and then we'll talk about some general challenges of testers and testing in Agile methods. These apply to Agile in the small as well as Agile, scaled Agile or Agile in the enterprise. So there really are four, I think, aspects to scaling within agility. It's organizational, it's product, it's the development team, and then there's testing and deployment. I'm not saying there's only four, but when I think about some of the challenges around scaling agility, these are four that clearly come to mind. The presentation in general is going to focus kind of across these areas because I think there's an intersection from a testing perspective. We don't as Agile is about self-directed teams, so it really is you don't test in a vacuum. You shouldn't be doing that in waterfall methods or any other method anyway, but particularly in Agile, it's not a go-it-alone testing activity, and you have to kind of talk about, hey, what we expect from other bits of the organization and how we want to intersect with them, how do we want to interact with them. In small, pure Agile implementations, much of what I'm going to say in this presentation doesn't really apply to if you have a small team doing websites and they're just throwing things up and they're collaborating on whiteboards and it's 2 or 3 or 4 developers and maybe a tester sitting together. A lot of this presentation doesn't apply at all. This is really, you need a couple of those teams put together. You need to be you need to have to integrate across teams and have deliverables coming out of them. That to me is Agile scaling, and some of these lessons are much more relevant there. Agile in the small is a very simple construct. When we talk about Scrum scalability, one of the things to focus on is this notion of a Scrum of Scrums. And if you look at these boxes, they really represent, and I should say this, I'm expecting the audience to have some general familiarity with Scrum, and so I'm not going to really provide much in the way of an overview for Scrum. That's sort of intentional. This is that quintessential picture for Scrum of Scrums. There's 3 product lines here. In this picture, there's the blue product line, the pink product line, and the green product line. There are 9 teams contributing to the product line under each. So those are 9 development teams, if you will. The dark blue or the darker boxes are the Scrum Masters. You actually might want to look at them as product owners as well. So there's a Scrum Master and a product owner per team. And the teams are busily sprinting, and they each have backlogs, and they each have a Scrum Master and a product owner. But then the question is, it needs to be begged, is how do you integrate across those teams? How do you share resources? How do you share test resources, environments? How do you share tools? How do you run scripts? How do you get third-party products running? And that's the rub of Scrum of Scrums. Scrum of Scrums is a kind of a discussion of how are we doing integration? How are all 9 teams producing deliverables, producing working code and working features, and how are we planning to integrate that to then deploy it to a customer or to deploy it in an IT environment? So you have the Scrum team sprinting at one level, but then there's a level 2 Scrum of Scrums, and to me that's really integration, it's coordination, it's human resource sharing, it's skill set assessments, it's managing impediments at a higher level, impediments across all of those teams, it's doing release planning across all of those teams, it's having release burn down charts and things like that. And then Scrum of Scrums is hierarchical, so there could be an S3 level or a Scrum of Scrums level where that group is guiding the Agile evolution and the Agile, methods across all three of those product lines. And I like to talk about this as the conversations change. At the lowest level, the conversations around the teams getting work done. At the second level, it's usually conversations around how are we integrating towards release goals, maybe from a feature compromise perspective or from trade-offs or from needing extra resources. And at the third level, it's really, guiding, for example, are the Agile standards in place. Budgeting would probably happen at the S3 level, and it just gives you a model. It's a nice working model that Agile in the sprawl, as you increase the number of teams, you have to have these layers, and they're not traditional layers, but they're Agile-esque layers of collaboration and of discussion. There are roles not defined behind the Scrum of Scrum. So the Scrum it's intentionally light in the literature, and there's not a lot of guidance out there. So it's kind of up to each team, each enterprise team, to figure it out on their own to define it. So the things that aren't there is, Scrum Masters. There's there's an organization of Scrum Masters. I mean, in that previous picture, there was sets of 9 Scrum Masters. Clearly, they weren't all at the same level of performance, so there's probably more senior Scrum Masters. There's a hierarchy of product owners. There's a hierarchy of lines of business. There's team management and reporting and release coordination that has to happen behind there. There may be external or functional organizations, quality measurement and governance that's going on. So I like to think of the Scrum of Scrums as being layered. Yes, you drive the Scrum or the Agile coordination via the Scrum of Scrums, but there's mirror images behind it, depending on your organizational structure. So, for example, if you had a PMO, there could very well be a PMO. The PMO could be instantiating the Scrum of Scrums, the S2 and the S3. Clearly, that might be a mapping for it. But at the very least, there's a hierarchy behind it. Maybe the easiest hierarchy is that of product owners. For every Scrum Master, there should be, one or very few if there's some sharing going on across the product owners, but there should be many product owners in that previous example supporting it. So you want to think in terms of, as you scale Agile, it starts looking like traditional, the way I think of it, it starts looking or connecting to traditional organizational structures. You still want to be lean, you still want to be Agile, but you have to start thinking in terms of coalescing the products of these teams and interacting with maybe what are traditional functional organizations. Another scaling, and this is sort of the introduction, getting kind of your head wrapped around, maybe some of the general aspects of scaling. Is Jeff Sutherland talks a lot about Scrum, different Scrum levels. There's a Scrum level A, a B, and a C, or types of Scrum. So Scrum type C is the more efficient. Everything is going on at once. And Scrum type A is what I'm most familiar with. I'll go to the next picture just to give everyone a feeling. So type A is what I'm most familiar with. You start a sprint, you stop a sprint. There's a pause potentially. It might only be a weekend between sprints. So it's isolated iterations or cycles of work. Type B, you start removing the waste between those iterations, so you start blending the activities from one sprint to the next. It's a little bit more, it feels perhaps a little bit more chaotic, but you're reducing that waste and you're reducing those pauses between. And then type C is all of that stuff happening in parallel. It's not that they're still iterating, but all of the organizational preparation. So one aspect of type C is the organization operates as a Scrum. So, for example, the accounting group is sprinting and having daily stand-ups. But the other thing